All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
All right, we're here with Chris Newmarker, my podcast partner and executive editor of Life Sciences at MassDevice. Chris Newmarker, happy day to you, sir.
Yeah, TGIF.
So, Chris, you're an accomplished writer. I want to run this past you. I'm trying to come up with a different image for or a different descriptor for COVID-19. We've been calling it an accelerant for so long, something that sort of sped up and revealed all these different deficiencies and cracks within the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Weighing this comparison, this term, I'm starting to think of it as more like a black light that's showing us all the stuff we don't want to see. Too graphic?
Boy.
Right. We'll put that back on the shelf for now.
I didn't know there was a body in the corner. Oh my gosh.
All right. We'll put that one on the clipboard for now, and maybe come back to it later.
Are you watching horror movies, Tom? What's going on?
It just reveals all the things we don't want to see, but I admit I'm having trouble.
It is true. It's like a test case. It's like, it's almost like let me think about that. But you're right. It's got to be like, it's like everything was just seemed to be moving along okay. And then you get something like this and you just get.
A hotel room looks clean and then.
You're like, oh man, I should sleep on top of the covers. This is.
I'm going to try to slip that one in an article on MassDevice next time. We'll see if you catch it.
Cool.
All right, so before we get into our great interviews of this week, we have a couple of interesting ones. I got to speak with Bharat Sundaram. He's the president and COO of Vizient, which is an organization that basically works with most of the hospitals out there to help them secure medical supplies and medical devices. And we had an interesting conversation about something we reported on this week on MassDevice about their efforts to increase our country's PPE production. So it was a great conversation about PPE, which is very important. But we also talked a bit about medtech, and without revealing too much, we looked forward to the future, and Vizient has the ability to quite effectively project where we're going with medtech and with healthcare spending. And Barth gives us a little bit of a sense of when things might get back to, quotation fingers, normal.
Yeah, when's it going to be back to normal? When? Oh, you can't tell me yet. We gotta listen to this.
You'll have to listen to the podcast like everybody else, Chris. Right. And I also got to talk to an interesting man, Adam Sachs, the CEO of Vicarious Surgical, which is a company that's developing a robotic surgical system that also incorporates VR.
Very cool.
And I've been playing with my son's VR headset recently, and it's really cool. And it's if they could make this work, a VR surgical combo. I know we've had also VR, employee VR for training, but to include it in a surgical system, that would be very cool as well.
That would be great. Yeah, it's always nice for surgeons to not have to glance over somewhere while they're working on you. So it's
yeah, exactly. And he had noted I had been playing a game with my son's headset, and I was getting nauseous because it was involved. It was actually recreated Doom. I don't know if you ever played Doom.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
On VR.
On VR,
and it was fun. And it was fun, but the running around in your mind through your eyes, but not on your feet, was really disorienting and actually made me queasy. But that's why surgery is so great, because surgeons never move. Right. So you can have VR, and you're not going to get nauseous in an unfortunate place like an operating room.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, hopefully, hopefully we see that advance a lot more. And who knows? All these kids are, your son could be training to be a future surgeon. It'd be great.
I know. That's a good point. I don't want him to hear the podcast. He may be making that argument. Before we get into these interviews, we, of course, want to find out what's happened this week. What news is big on the MassDevice pages? So we'll go through our countdown. We'll hit numbers 4 and 5. We'll slip into our first interview with Bharat Sundaram, and then we'll follow up with the rest later. So what has been the 5th largest newsmaker on the MassDevice site this week? Chris Newmarker.
Yeah. Well, just today, we had news that the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, they've, handed down, it looks like it's an important decision related to medical device preemption. And for those who don't know that legalese, it's basically that, if FDA approves a device, then that device has protection from lawsuits at the state level. The device in question was in this lawsuit was one from Becton Dickinson's Bard subsidiary. Bard had argued that this thing only was cleared, it wasn't approved, but it had been reclassified by FDA, and there are all kinds of new guidelines and controls around the reclassification of these types of devices. And the appeals court said, they aren't specific enough to say that this gets preempted just because there's some guidances and special controls because the overall devices got reclassified. So it looks like it's a win for the lawsuit lawyers. You could. It's the preemption argument has appears to have some more limits now after this appeals court decision.
Terrific. No, that certainly will generate a lot of interest. Okay, and let's go to number 4. This is we're going to hear from a familiar name in this one.
Yes, we've got we've got another update on Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes' trial. It's now set to start in March. So March 2021, jury selection starts on March 9th. So, save the date. That's when it's probably the biggest criminal trial we've ever had in the medical device industry. I even have a question on LinkedIn asking, is there anything that's ever been bigger than this? Feel free to answer if I'm forgetting something, but it certainly seems to have been just this huge story. Just speaks to a lot of things around, Silicon Valley and innovation, and when we sometimes perhaps get too excited about innovation and don't question enough the technology behind it. It should be this should be quite the trial to watch, and here's to hoping we have a vaccine by then and things are a little quieter, and this hopefully is the biggest news we got going on.
I feel like we should come up with a code word for that, where instead of saying we hope there's a vaccine by then, we'll just say something like pumpernickel. So we all just know, that's what we mean, because that so much is bearing on that. Are you going to try to increase the MassDevice budget and send a reporter out there to cover this?
Hey, if we could fly them out there, they'll say flying out, and they have an in-person trial. That would be maybe we could get somebody to go to NorCal to hang around San Jose and cover the trial. That would be fun. Well, we'll see. Here's the hoping for pumpernickel.
That's right.
Edit those stories while eating my pumpernickel toast.
I think we're starting a couple of crazes with black light and now pumpernickel. Yeah. All right. Yeah. This podcast is in a death spiral. So before we hit the ground, let's hear from Bharat Sundaram, the president and COO of Vizient. Well, Bharat Sundaram, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
So we had reported some news this week on the MassDevice. Vizient announced that it had entered into an agreement with Encompass Group for some personal protective equipment. And I want to explore that deal. But before we get into that, I'd love our Device Talk listeners to understand a bit more, if they already don't know, what Vizient is and what are the services you provide to the healthcare system.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Vizient's the largest performance improvement company in the country focused on healthcare. We serve about over 50% of the acute care hospitals in the country, over 2/3 of the large integrated delivery networks, and over 95% of the academic medical centers in the nation, in addition to over 20% of the standalone ambulatory market. And we serve them across really, 4 key areas. One, pharmacy. We help them with purchasing, pharmacy costs, utilization, engaging their clinical staff. We help them in supply chain, where we do the same, and MassDevice and MedSurg and capital purchase services, help them with data around those areas, as well as in contracting and driving and price savings and aggregating their purchasing power. We have a whole set of offerings in quality and operations, including a deep set of analytics and services to engage physicians and clinicians in driving change management using data and informatics. And lastly, we help them in strategy to help them drive growth within their markets. Ultimately, our mission is to enable them to accelerate performance by aligning their cost, quality, and market activities.
So you have a very unique perspective then on where we are today with the healthcare system and how it's adapting to COVID. What are you seeing? You're in touch with so many systems. You work with so many systems. How is the system faring overall?
Yeah, it's certainly because of our supply reach and how we service what we call members. We have been intimately involved in that. I would tell you, we probably aggregate over $100 billion of spend on behalf of our members. So we've got pretty good visibility into what's happening in the marketplace across these different product categories, including PPE. When COVID first started accelerating back in the middle of February, what we did is we immediately formed a war room, a 70-person war room within Vizient to help our members adjudicate issues and identify sources of supply. And what we quickly found is this wasn't just a supply chain problem in terms of, access and visibility and allocation. There certainly was that issue, but it was fundamentally also a supply problem. There was a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand. Not only did you have demand that was 15, 20 times, if not higher than typical, but you also had constraints in supply because 80% of that PPE product is manufactured in Asia and China in particular, where the lines were down because of the pandemic and product was being kept in country. So you had this, confluence of events that created really substantial issues. And in some of the, it's probably not as frenetic as it was back in March and April and into May, but it's still a significant issue for our member hospitals. And in particular, in categories like gowns and gloves and masks, it continues to be an issue. Not only do you have our members trying to service patients that have the COVID or PUI with COVID, but in addition, they need more protection for their healthcare delivery frontline that is taking care of patients in general, just to be protected against the disease. So you're seeing this demand and continue to be issues with supply.
Did you see similar issues, supply issues, or any challenges whatsoever outside of PPE with medical devices, be they used for surgery or for other purposes, or is the primary disruption been on the PPE front?
Well, the primary disruption has been on the PPE front and in pharmacy, some critical pharmaceuticals. Although we didn't get to as acute of levels, some of those drugs that are used for intubated patients, there were certainly concerns about shortage situations there, although they didn't get to the acuity that you had in PPE. On the med device front, that's been less of an issue. And part of that is because some of those procedures have been frankly delayed, but you're starting to see that bolus of activity start to come back up, but not to a level that it hasn't been manageable in terms of access to product, at least on a global basis.
On the PPE front, what is being done differently going forward? And perhaps this might be an opportunity to talk about a bit about your agreement with Encompass, which you wrote about, as I mentioned, on MassDevice this week.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Tom, it's not just a supply chain problem, and we've got to work on allocation methodologies. We've got to work on visibility, and we're putting tools and technologies in place to do that. But it was, fundamentally a supply problem, a supply and mismatch problem. And it was fundamentally a supply redundancy problem. So you had not only not enough supply being produced, but yet supply being produced in a really concentrated region, such that when any issue happened in that region, that the ramifications were pretty severe as you followed that down through the supply chain. And so what we've been doing, and it fits into the Encompass question you asked about, is we've been looking at new and creative strategies by which to stand up new sources of supply, and in particular, North American and US-based manufacturing. So we've put, tens of millions of dollars of our capital at risk to encourage new companies to get into the PPE space with US-based and North American manufacturing. So we've given them the working capital to get into the mask business, get into the PPE, get into the gowns business, get into the face shield business. And we've then, in addition to providing them that working capital, we've also provided them with the commitment and purchase so that they know once they get those lines stood up, that they have, a steady stream of purchases that would justify them making those investments. So you mentioned Encompass, which is one that we just announced. We've done work with Standard Textile. We've done work with cable companies that we've helped get into this space, uniform companies that we've helped them get into this space. The advantage to the healthcare delivery for our healthcare delivery members is not only do we have this additional redundancy in manufacturing, but as people step into these agreements, including the ones including the Encompass agreement, these manufacturers are committing to holding US-based inventory on behalf of our members as well. That's dedicated to our membership, so that if there's a surge, if there's an issue in manufacturing, we've got dedicated inventory that we can allocate to our members. And it's not something new, that we've started to do that last year in pharmacy. So we have a private label program called Nova Plus, and we created a Nova Plus Enhanced Supply program where those manufacturers not only participate in our private label, but they hold inventory on behalf of our members. And it was really beneficial to our members through the crisis. So I mentioned ventilator-associated drugs. There were shortage situations. Our members were insulated by that because we were able to provide, as an example, 650,000 vials of propofol above and beyond their traditional historic allocation because these manufacturers were holding inventory on their behalf. And now we're extending that into the PPE space.
So what does this program look like? What does it create? Is it creating the capacity to build more PPE, or are you actually going to be stockpiling PPE and have that set aside somewhere for your members?
It's both. It's both creating the capacity to build PPE in a more redundant way in the supply chain. But then to your point, it also creates stockpiling or inventory that these suppliers will hold on behalf of our members, and we will ensure that they're cycled so that they're current and usable product. And then we'll also ensure that's allocated appropriately. And there's visibility around that allocation should a shortage situation occur.
And are we talking about just standard gowns and masks, or are we talking more the N95 mask, more I guess robust protective systems? You mentioned face shields and such.
Yeah, we're talking all the full gamut of PPE. So the ones we've announced so far have been gowns, both reusable and disposable, different levels. We will be doing this in masks, including the N95 mask. But our view is to continue to expand this into different categories of critical product and PPE, gloves, et cetera. And in addition, in pharmacy too. So I mentioned last year we signed an agreement that would do that for 11 critical drugs. Just the last few weeks, we announced a new agreement with Pfizer, where they're holding inventory for additional 6 essential drugs. And it's about not just bringing new product or bringing new lines of manufacturing capacity, but it's also, to your point, that holding of the inventory on behalf of our members. It has the effect of not just providing them safety if there's a shortage situation, but it's hundreds of millions of inventory holding costs that these manufacturers are bearing on behalf of our members.
In your ideal situation going forward, what should the percentage of materials coming from the U.S. be considered, since it seems as if the fact that so much of our supply came from outside the U.S. before was, if not the entire problem, was at least part of the problem?
Yeah, I don't know if we have a specific target per se. We are aggressively moving to more, and I think it's both. I think it's U.S. based manufacturing, but it's also redundancy in manufacturing. So what we're looking for is to build more North American capacity, but also ensure that the capacity we build also has redundancy in other locations, so that if there's ever a fault in the supply chain, you can have fallback into another location. So, for example, if there's a hurricane in Puerto Rico, you're not fully dependent on product coming there. You have access to other locations of supply.
Understood. And just again, looking outside of the PPE in at other medical devices, how involved are you with those in the purchase of those? And do you see those channels changing at all going forward?
On the medical device space, so a critical part of how we serve our members is in the medical device space, and I can go into how we do that. We do that through a combination, contracts, technologies, services, et cetera, and engaging their clinicians and physicians around the usage of these medical supplies. As it relates to these inventory issues that I talked about and these stockpiling issues, I think, like I mentioned, it's probably less acute, on at least from our experience, on the med device space in particular. Having said that, we're thinking about that category differently, and helping our health systems think about cost of device along with quality and outcomes that they can get as a result, so they can look at total cost of ownership, impact on length of stay, impact on return to work, and things like that. And so that's probably where we're more focused around applying our informatics and data to help our members make holistic buying decisions around med device. I think these issues around inventory and stockpiling are probably a little bit less acute in that area of spend.
Sure. But do you see any change in perhaps some vendor consolidation going forward with the purchase supplies? Do you see an effort by hospitals who are grappling with their financial shortfalls from all this pushing down on pricing? Is there a move toward that? Just guess I'm trying to understand for the medical device companies and the suppliers that we speak to, if they can perhaps anticipate any differences going forward and how their own products might be purchased.
Yeah, and I think most of your listeners would say that probably happened pre-COVID too. And what COVID's doing is accelerating the cost pressure.
Yep.
And so there will be pressure on pricing, and so it's also from a health system perspective, it's also creating more pressure to engage with the physicians and the clinicians to driving standardization, looking at utilization and care variation. But also, with that comes price, right? Price of device. And I think there was a focus on that before. There will continue to be an even more acute focus on it going forward. But I think, looking at it holistically and looking at, when you look at the cost of usage, looking at, quality outcomes, et cetera, and then engaging your physicians and clinicians in that decision. And a lot of the work that we've done pre-COVID, and actually a lot of the work that we're engaged on to do during and post-COVID, is how do we help our members engage their physicians and clinicians in some of those buying decisions to drive not just best price on the front end, but standardization, utilization reduction, care variation reduction.
Great. And just final question, you must have a model to how you expect their healthcare system to be pressured by COVID going forward in coming months? Do you have a sense? No, if you talk to the medical device companies, no one obviously is willing to commit and project on sales and such, but do you have an understanding of where this may track, or is this just like tracking hurricanes during hurricane season and you may have different waves coming in one after the other?
Yeah, no, we do. I mentioned what Vizient does, and we have these 4 areas: pharmacy, supply chain, quality, and operations and strategy, and where we help members on that strategy domain. We help them with growth, and a lot of the work we do there is forecasting. And so we help them forecast, as an example, patient volumes by service line at the national, regional, and local level. And we have PhDs and research scientists that are looking at the data to help our members, and actually a number of probably your listeners probably subscribe to these tools to help them forecast what volumes they can expect for different procedures, different service lines, et cetera. So we have a view, and I'll give you a couple examples of that. One, as it relates to COVID in particular, one of the things that our team worked on was the projected the utilization of ICU beds and actually inpatient beds during the COVID crisis, and they were remarkably accurate. So as an example, in New York, they predicted at the peak in March and April, they predicted the peak would be 10,351 from an average daily census. The actual was 10,100. In Chicago, they predicted the peak ICU to be 410. The actual was 420. So they were remarkably accurate. And I would just highlight on that piece, it was because they appropriately factored in hospitalization rates based on the number of people that were not just tested for COVID, but the number of people that probably actually had COVID, which was a larger number than what was actually tested for COVID. And that's why you saw a lot of the models way overshoot it. And then the second is they properly accounted for social distancing and the impact that would have. And so my point is on that one is that, we're pretty good about forecasting. What they've done is now taken their forecast and said, okay, what does that mean for the health system and volumes, particularly from an inpatient perspective, but both. They did both inpatient, outpatient because of COVID. And we don't project volumes coming back to where they were at till the back half of 21, early part of 22. So that gives you a sense of, at least our expectation of it. It's probably come back faster than we would have expected, in terms of, but I think the impact of the economy, the impact of the care shift, the impact of telehealth suggests to us that it's going to be a while before it gets back to the volumes pre-COVID. And then even then, from an inpatient perspective, you have kind of this steady decline over time.
Well, Bharat Sundaram, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, now I'm back here with Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences, and we're going to learn what our third most biggest newsmaker of the week is. What is it, Chris?
So we got news in the diabetes space. Medtronic is saying it's going to acquire insulin pen maker Companion Medical for an undisclosed amount. And this is just another example of how Medtronic is expanding, trying to get even more diabetes capabilities. I mean, there's definitely really trying to be the dominant player in diabetes treatment. And, so this is just more news on that front. And so, you got Medtronic, you got Abbott, you got some, really cool, smaller companies like, smaller, they still, can like have billions of dollars, but, Dexcom, the Tandems, the Insulettes. But,
Medtronic had said a couple of months ago during their first quarterly call of the year that they'd be looking to acquire. So it looks like they're backing that up.
Yeah, they're still shopping.
Yeah, good news. All right, what is number two? Number two surprised me, as did number one. So let's start with number two.
Yeah, this is really just like what's getting the most page views on MassDevice. So this is our readers, saying that this was interesting for them. But I think it's just another example of we've got M&A going. We got people doing acquisitions even in these just crazy, tough, interesting times. I mean, Cooper Vision, says that it acquired a customized contact lens manufacturer and distributor called, GP Specialists. And I think kind of the big news here for Cooper Vision is that they're saying this is, expanding its, especially eye care business and, really giving it some leadership when it comes to, addressing myopia. So some news on the, vision device front here.
Great. Now let's hold off on number one. As I said, I found it surprising, but it really was good news. But before we learn about that, let's hear some more good news from Adam Sachs. Adam is the CEO of Vicarious Surgical. It's a Boston area company. Yay. And let's hear from Adam. Well, Adam Sachs, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So one of the more, I think, interesting elements of medtech is the adoption, the quick adoption, I think, of surgical robotic surgery, rather, I should say. And it's an area that's been dominated by, or is becoming dominated by, larger players. So it's interesting to see a startup move into this space. And I know you have more elements than just the robotics. So tell us a little bit about Vicarious Surgical, and maybe we can get into its origins.
Yeah, for sure. So, we started this company about 6 years ago. You're right. Surgical robotics it's one of the most interesting fields. Obviously, I think that, given that I've taken my career, but overall, I might disagree on the rapid adoption. I mean, there's a ton of interest, and there's been a huge push in this space over the last 5 years or so. But despite the fact that surgical robots have been widely available for the past 20 years, arguably have been available with ESOP before that, and despite all of that, we're still looking at single-digit percent penetration in the best markets, in the U.S. market overall, and less than that worldwide. And there's it's not at all to bash the incumbents or anything that exists today. I mean, there's some pretty incredible technology, but, the world has changed so much in the last 20, 25 years since the invention of the first generation of surgical robotics. And we really have the ability to now leverage all of these new technologies and paradigm shifts across both robotics, some of which are actually our own invention, and across user interfaces that will allow us to create something that is much lower cost, much easier to use, and frankly, it's better for the surgeon, the patient, and the hospital. That's
a great point. I mean, perhaps I was listening to too many quarterly calls last week and hearing all the rosy reports from the big players. And you're right. No, we clearly need to do more. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today. You have a unique approach or a unique additional element to your system. Tell us a bit about your technology.
Yeah, so the real core of the technology itself is actually the robotics. So the robotic system that we've designed is essentially a miniaturized system, and it has 9 degrees of freedom per arm. That's 2 more than anybody else, and it's not a coincidence. It's that we've fully and faithfully replicated the motion of the human body, of the surgeon's body. So our whole system goes in through one incision into the abdominal cavity. That single incision is really important to us. Not as much because there have been a lot of single incision solutions in the past. I think the more important thing is around freeing the surgeon from that incision site. So if you put everything in through one incision, you're no longer defining your kinematics, your robotic motion, by pivoting around the abdominal incision site. You're able to generate any motion that you want. And we've decided to mimic the motion of the surgeon's body for the most natural, easiest experience for the surgeon. So all 9 degrees of freedom happen inside the human arm. It's miniature human proportion arms, and then a camera that actually is capable of moving anywhere inside the abdomen. And then all of this is controlled, linked with this paradigm shift in human-machine interaction that's driven by virtual reality. So the surgeon puts on a VR headset, and then the user interface is immersive and makes the surgeon feel not like they're controlling a giant machine, but like they've been beamed inside of the patient.
So how does the VR function work? I mean, I've used the Oculus. We were talking before the call that I was using my son's toy, and I can see this video game in front of me, but what is a surgeon using your system seeing? Are they seeing the actual images from the camera or some VR replication of that?
They're seeing live camera images with spacing between the 2 cameras that is much more natural than anything that exists. It's about 12 to 14 millimeters instead of about 4 millimeters. So it provides deep, really immersive 3D view. But then the coolest part is that the camera pans, tilts, and yaws. It has 3 degrees of freedom, all about the surgeon's head motion.
Wow.
So it naturally moves in every degree of freedom wherever the surgeon looks.
So where physically on this planet, where can the surgeon be and where can the patient be? How far apart are they from each other?
It's a really good question. Before I answer that, can I kind of dive into more philosophical thoughts about remote surgery?
Absolutely.
A lot of people have talked for a long time about remote surgery, and it's never taken off. And I think there's a few reasons for that. First is, today's systems cost $1 million to build and they sell them for $2 million. I mean, our systems are about an order of magnitude lower cost to build, and we can offer them for much lower cost. And that's incredibly important because, a hospital that can afford a first generation surgical robot likely has the surgeons to operate it as well. So to have remote surgery really have a meaningful impact in patient care, we need to start offering much lower cost surgical systems. That being said, I also think that remote surgery isn't really what telemedicine should be about, at least within the field of surgery. It should be about remote training. So, if we have one surgeon here in Boston at Mass General Hospital operate on a patient in a developing country, I mean, that helps one patient. But if they teach a surgeon in a developing country do live proctoring like they would fly to do typically in the OR during a live case, can take over for the tricky parts and help teach them, giving another level of confidence, then we really are able to actually improve and elevate surgeon skill sets all across the world, and frankly, all with our technology.
So, what then is the primary function or the need for the VR interface? Is it for the remote opportunities that you laid out really well, or are there reasons that a surgeon would want to operate on a patient in the same building using this interface rather than just get in there themselves and see what's going on?
It's, our main focus is not even the remote procedures. We've built out, actually the core of our system is built out over the network. So we are able to and have done remote demo procedures already. But the main advantages of VR and of the single incision and the fact that it's human-like motion, it all comes down to ease of use and orientation for the surgeon, allowing the surgeon to really feel like they've been, beamed inside of the patient, and instead of having to set up a machine, having to learn and practice for 100 procedures to get good at how to define the motion by where they put the incision sites, being able to learn how to manipulate the camera using clutch pedals. All of this takes time, takes effort, and takes mental energy from the surgeon, even once they're trained during the procedure. So it's really about natural immersive interfaces for surgeons for the same reason that your son uses a VR headset to play video games.
Do you see an opportunity? What is the primary function or the reason for purchase going to be? Will it be performing surgery? Do you see training being the biggest selling point? Why would a hospital look toward a Vicarious surgery? And after that, I do want to get into specifics a little bit about your origins and just where you are with the development of the system.
It's absolutely primarily a surgical robot for operating on patients. I think, though, that all of these elements really come together for why a hospital would be excited, right? We have the ability to actually improve access and reduce cost of care for the hospital. We have the ability to, unlock new procedures and make for a much better, much more capable experience for the surgeon. And we have the ability to remotely train and provide assistance. And I think in today's increasingly complex healthcare world with more and more players, especially in surgical robotics, we're going to have to start tackling all of these. It can't just be more capable. It can't just be more fun. It actually has to also be lower cost.
Is there an opportunity presented by the pandemic, and would there ever be an opportunity for a patient to be in the OR by themselves with others just working with VR to eliminate that risk of germ transference?
Yeah, this is something that we've definitely bounced around a lot. I think the pandemic-related opportunities for us come more into, honestly, it's going to be a less interesting answer than you were probably hoping for here, but the economics of capital equipment purchasing.
Sure.
Having an order of magnitude lower cost device and remote training. And the fact that right now, most surgeons are actually banned from leaving the state right now.
Oh, interesting.
By their hospitals, or they're not allowed to. A lot of surgeons are not allowed to return to the hospital within 2 weeks of having been out of the state. So it's I think the opportunities here are much more in the economics and the training than anything else. I do think long term, there are going to be some really interesting opportunities around how surgery is managed, how patients are managed, where they're managed, whether it's in the ASC setting with robotics, which would be very interesting, or in the main hospital setting. But I do think that we are at least multiple years away from a patient being in a hospital, in an operating room without any staff.
Okay, let me focus a little more then on yesterday and then today. So yesterday, as in your history, what is the origin of Vicarious?
Yeah, so it came out of a conversation with Dr. Green and me and Sammy around the frustrations of surgeons today, around essentially the idea that I think the way I'm going to call him Barry because it's very hard for me to call him Dr. Green, honestly. But the way Barry brought this question to me was like, how is it possible that today's robotics actually haven't solved a lot of the problems of laparoscopy? They haven't actually improved access that much. And what can we do to fix that? And it was sort of his push and his inspiration combined with our robotic design and vision for the human-machine interface. We actually, it's interesting to people talk about pivots all the time. I mean, this has been like the same road since we started it in 2014, building out the robot. The vision has been almost exactly the same. And it's just been iteration and developing a completely new robotic technology. And we're getting pretty close. We've been incredibly fortunate to be funded by, I think, some of the best names in tech. Bill Gates and Vinod Khosla, among others.
I didn't even hit upon the financing. Yes, you're right. Tell us a little bit about the recent round that you closed on.
Yeah, so we raised $13 million round, brings our total funding to $45 million. Mm-hmm. And this, we're incredibly excited about E15, significantly because they have a really deep network in hospitals and in medical devices. We're actually, they don't have that many direct investments. And if you look at their direct portfolio, I mean, it's pretty fantastic. Includes SpaceX and Oris, which was just acquired by J&J.
Sure. That is a great family to be part of. And finally, where are you with your system in clinical testing and commercial availability?
Yeah, so we're preclinical still. We are We're getting very close. I don't want to commit to an exact timeline here, unsurprisingly, but I will say, especially with some of the recent announcements that we've heard on timelines of some of our competitors, we'll be right in step with them.
What does your regulatory path look like going forward? How many clinical trials do you anticipate having to do?
We are still working through that with the FDA. It's really going to depend on their feedback and our recommendations for what will produce confidence that our device is safe.
Are you pursuing PMA or 510K?
Today we're pursuing 510K.
510K.
Yeah, and I mean we have heard some of the recent announcements there that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Right.
But overall, we're pretty confident that we can pursue the 510K path, and it comes down to focus more than anything else, right? And making sure that our device is within what's necessary to pursue that path.
Excellent. And just final question: you've mentioned price a few times. Do you have an idea of what you'll be charging for this, or you just think have you just mapped it out and have sort of a ballpark percentage of what it might be of other systems?
Yeah, today, I mean, our focus is, I think it's too early to set price. We really need to get into the clinic, test price, understand the costs and benefits of various pricing strategies. That being said, our mission is to expand healthcare access, and our internal goal has always been a 10x reduction in cost to produce the technology, because we believe that is the kind of drastic reduction that is going to be necessary to get ubiquity of surgical robotics.
Outstanding. Well, it's a great story. I love the fact that you're in Boston. Yay, Boston.
Yeah, you should come visit at some point.
When I'm able to, I'd love to come down. You're not too far away.
Sounds great.
Excellent. Well, thanks for taking some time and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you as well. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, it's great to hear from Adam Sachs, and it's always great to hear from a podcast partner, Chris Newmarker of MassDevice. Chris, what is the number one newsmaker this week on our MassDevice site?
The number one news is that Neuralink received an FDA breakthrough device designation for a non-invasive neuromodulation device called the Relivion DP system. And that system's for treating major depression. So, I mean, this is a headset-like device. You place it on the head, and it uses neurostim to kind of stimulate the release of neurotransmitters in the brainstem, and help you modulate your brain networks with control of mood. So this could be something. Unfortunately, depression is a major problem. A lot of people wrestle with it. I'm sure a lot of people are even wrestling with it even more right now. This could be something that could hopefully help people out. And I think that's why this got so much attention on MassDevice, because it's I hate to use the word cool device too much, but yeah, cool, something that's a headset that you can put on your head and help relieve your depression with it. That's a pretty cool device.
Absolutely, and much needed, and just kind of scratching the surface there. But great, that's a great number one, and that's the end of this podcast. So, Chris Newmarker, where can folks find you on social media?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Twitter at Newmarker, just like a new marker.
Excellent. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. I am at MedTechTom. And if you share this podcast, and we hope you do, please tag Chris and or myself. We'd love to be part of that conversation. And also, if you would help us out by subscribing to the podcast, if you do that, you get these podcasts sent immediately to you when it comes out. Like as I've said in the past, we have hundreds of people who listen to this the first day or 2 days when it comes out. So if you're waiting until 3 or 4 or 5 days to listen, we're grateful that you do, but you don't need to wait so long. Just subscribe, and you'll get it immediately sent to your phone. So please do subscribe. Please do share the podcast. And please tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast waiting for you.